guys, Jason Fitzgerald here with Strength Running, and I got an interesting question the other day about running at altitude. So I thought I'd record this video to help any of you who might be traveling to altitude or even living at altitude, because it is a training stress and it definitely makes running more challenging. And so what do I mean by it's a training stress? Well, it's something that is going to slow you down, that's going to impact your recovery, that's going to make running more difficult, just like other training stresses like high heat and humidity. And I think that is a really good comparison. If it's 90 degrees outside, it's really humid, you're going to have to modify the run that you're about to do. If it's a workout, you're going to have to slow things down. If it's any other run, you're really going to have to dial back the effort so that it's not so challenging. And altitude is very similar. So the question I got was, what should I do when I go up to altitude? Should I run the same training paces that I do at sea level? And how do I rein in my effort so that I'm not training too hard when I go up to altitude? This is a great question because as a training stress, altitude is going to make running more difficult, and you do have to modify your training a little bit if you do come up here to Denver or another high altitude city. So the first thing to remember is that yes, you are going to have to modify your training paces so that you're running a little bit slower. For me personally, I find that I'm running about 15 to 30 seconds slower per mile on an easy run up here in Denver than if I go back to Boston where I'm from and run at sea level. That's because there's just simply not as much oxygen in the air, and to a lesser extent, the higher altitude air is slightly dehydrating. So it just makes those longer runs and more challenging workouts a little bit more difficult if you're getting more and more dehydrated. And so, yes, you're definitely going to have to update your pacing. And what I would recommend is actually relying more on effort and perceived effort than on a strict training pace. So if you go out for an easy run at altitude, then let's just have the effort be easy. Now, the pace might be wildly different than what you are used to at sea level, but that's just part of the game. That is just the nature of running at high altitude. So slow down the pace, make sure the effort feels similar to what you might be doing at sea level, and you're going to get in a good, easy effort stimulus for that run. So running by effort is a really good way of dialing back the intensity and making sure that you're not trying to run too hard. Because if your easy pace is, let's just say 8 minutes a mile, and that's where you're comfortable at, you're going to have a hard time maintaining that same pace if you come to Denver and you're up at 5,000 or 6,000 feet. Now things do get a little bit more dicey when you go up to even higher altitudes. So if you go up to 8,000 feet, 9,000 feet and up, I might recommend that if you're only at that altitude for, let's say, a week or less, let's say you just go there for a quick vacation, a 1-week vacation, I might actually have you not run any harder workouts because it's going to take you a couple days to adjust to the altitude. You're probably not going to feel great up at those higher altitudes, especially if you're coming directly from sea level. And that's going to make those harder workouts really, really challenging. And number one, it's going to be hard to run a pace-based workout if you're at altitude because the paces almost don't mean anything anymore. You're just going to be running slower. And the other reason is because if you run a workout and it's substantially slower than what you're used to at sea level, that is going to knock down your confidence. And we don't want that to happen. Runners, I mean, that's like all we have, right? Is our confidence, our mental toughness, and our relationship to the sport. So we don't want runners to get their confidence knocked down a peg or two. We want you to stay confident in your abilities and really rack up all those small wins and little victories throughout the training cycle so that you are staying motivated and confident in your abilities. And if you have a really, really bad workout at altitude because of the altitude, because you don't feel good, because you're trying to rely on pace too much, then that is not a way to build mental fitness around our running. So we certainly want to avoid that. All right, so besides relying more on effort at altitude, besides skipping our faster workouts for short trips to even higher altitude, one thing that I'll recommend that runners do is regular strides when they're at altitude. We can still run strides at altitude, and we can still practice running fast, but let's not do that in a way that is aerobically challenging. The great thing about strides is that they're short and fast, but you get a full recovery, and they're not really challenging your cardiovascular system. You may also want to avoid any really steep or substantial hills if you come to altitude, just for the reason that that's going to turn any easy effort into almost a lactate threshold or a tempo effort. Because if you've ever been up to 9 or 10,000 feet and you hit one of those big inclines that just doesn't seem to end up here in the Rocky Mountains, you'll notice that your heart rate spikes and it stays really high. And you're probably going to need to walk if you're not used to the altitude and you're not used to running uphill for 3, 4, 5 minutes at a time at such a high heart rate. So if you are just trying to run easy and you're in a very hilly area, maybe you go out into the mountains and you go to Breckenridge or Vail or one of the big tourist spots, it's really hard to find flat terrain out there because you're up in the mountains. Now, you can find some flat ground, and so I'd recommend that you do most of your running on that flat ground. Now, if you do just want to replace your faster workout with a hilly trail run, I think that's another great opportunity for you to get in some hills, get some experience running uphill at altitude. It's quite a doozy. And it'll also replace the faster, more structured workout that you had planned with still a hard effort, but one that's not so structured and not so specific to your goals. But you are on vacation, you are exploring a new place, so have some fun, get out there on the trails, and explore those hilly trails at altitude. So ultimately, I want you to remember that running at altitude is a stress. Just like running in 90 degrees when it's really humid. You're going to have to modify your workouts and take that into consideration. So if you're at a reasonable altitude like Denver, you can probably maintain what you're doing. But if you do go up higher to 9,000 feet or above, that's the time when you may want to dial back the intensity of your workouts or skip them altogether and hopefully stay on flat ground if you're totally new to altitude, because you will really struggle on those hills. So I hope this was helpful if you're thinking about coming to altitude, if you're thinking about visiting Denver and doing some great runs as you plan your vacation or you plan some workouts at altitude. Just remember that it makes things harder, but other than that, stay hydrated and you'll probably be just fine.